To wrap up our session on print versus web, we are going to talk for a little bit about file types. You know when you are trying to load a website and it takes
forever.
Most of the time the reason why is because some of the graphics on that site are using either the wrong type of file or just one that is too large for the page, which is causing a traffic jam when it comes to loading it to you. As we start to discuss file types, it is important to consider the fact that when designing for the web, you want to optimize the file type so that it's smaller and compact for the web. If you use a large file for a website, it could take a long time for it to load, causing users to give up. If you have a client as a graphic designer and they're losing customers because their website takes too long, you could also lose the job. So that is an important factor to keep in mind if this is a field that you would like to go forward with in your future. However, when printing, it's pretty much the opposite. You don't want to skimp on size. You want as much detail as possible. Smaller file sizes in printing typically means lower quality. Computer monitors typically use about a resolution of like 72, whereas a home printer, like your typical home printer, is probably somewhere around 100 or 150. However, a professional printer will typically use a resolution of somewhere around 300. If you use a file size like that on the web, it would make the site load much slower. This explains why when you print something out from the web and it's transferred to your printer, the quality doesn't necessarily transfer, as we mentioned in earlier videos. Let's move real quick to file types. Some file types, such as JPEGs, take it a step further by adding a process known as compression. Every time you save a JPEG, it squeezes the file just a little bit more. That's like you telling your computer that you're less concerned about the quality of the image and you are more concerned about saving space. When considering file types to use, size is actually really only one factor. Other factors that you want to consider are things like transparency and preservation of layers. When you're in the middle of designing something, you never want to use a file like a JPEG because if you have multiple layers, they will all be flattened, which means that will make it very difficult to edit further on in the future. It's ideal when you're in the editing process to always keep an up-to-date file in a file format such as PSD for Photoshop, which is a Photoshop file, or AI, Adobe Illustrator for Illustrator, so that you can continue to make tweaks to it. Even when you do finish your image and save it as a JPEG, you still want to hang on to that AI or PSD file so that you can come back and make edits in the future. It is also important to add that many websites won't necessarily read a layered file. So if you were to put in an AI file or a PSD file, then it might not actually load on the site because the site probably won't be able to decode it. Lastly, I mentioned transparency. When you save a JPEG, any space that you haven't been used is going to get a white background color. If you put this on a background that is not white, that border will show up. However, if you use a file like a PNG, it will preserve the transparency, making it possible for you to put it on a background of any color without a white border showing up around the edges. Lastly, let's just touch on naming files for a quick minute. You never want to use unusual characters in your file names. Although your computer may open that file several times, magically one day it may decide that it is
not gonna do it. Not gonna do it.
Let me show you why. Your computer is searching your file name for a specific character. In this case, the period is incredibly important. It's looking for a file type to determine what program to open in order to access that particular file. If my computer sees .ppt, it's going to open up PowerPoint so that it can load my document. If it sees .doc, it's going to open up Word, and so on and so forth. However, if it searches and sees it might just give up and erase your file altogether.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
For this reason, you want to stick to using only letters and numbers and perhaps spaces. In the dark ages when I was in college, we couldn't even use spaces. If we wanted to separate the words, it was far more safe to add an underscore. However, these days, you're safe adding a space. You will want to practice a little bit of professionalism, netiquette, and organization when naming your files. There's plenty of room for being silly in life, but for your file names, it's just not the place. And you never know when you're going to want to share that document with a college or a professional, and you're not going to necessarily have time to stop and change the document name. Following all these steps will ensure that you are successful and that you are far less likely to lose your files, which is not fun. Save early and save often. Have a great day.